Eleanor Whitmore grabbed a stranger's arm so hard her knuckles went white. "Please." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Pretend to be my husband, right now." The man looked down at her hand, looked at her face, didn't flinch. Behind her, Silas Crow was cutting through the crowd with a legal document in his hand and a smile that had already decided her future. 1 minute, maybe less. Her father was 3 months in the ground, and this man intended to collect what he believed the dead owed him, starting with her. The stranger said, "All right," and Eleanor had no idea she'd just grabbed the most powerful man in Virginia. If that first moment already has your pulse up, subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far Eleanor's story travels. The debt notice had arrived on a Tuesday. Eleanor had been at the kitchen table going over the summer harvest numbers when Martha, her housekeeper, set the envelope beside her coffee without a word, which meant Martha had already read the return address and already understood what it was. Martha had worked at Whitmore House for 22 years. She knew trouble before it knocked. Eleanor opened it with a letter knife, read it once straight through, set it face down on the table. Then she picked it up and read it again. Silas Crow, attorney at law, County of Albemarle, Virginia. Regarding the outstanding debt instrument executed between the late Thomas Whitmore and the undersigned, dated March 14, 1811. In accordance with Clause 7, subsection 3, the lender hereby invokes the right of alternative restitution in the event of the borrower's death without full satisfaction of principal. Clause 7, subsection 3. Her father had borrowed $4,000 over 3 years. She had known that. What she had not known, what Thomas Whitmore had apparently not read or had not believed would ever matter, was the line buried near the bottom of the 4th page. The borrower's unmarried daughter, if of legal age at time of claim, may satisfy the outstanding debt through lawful marriage to the lender. She was 25. She was unmarried. Silas Crow wanted to collect. She had 3 days before he filed the claim formally with the county court. That was what the letter said. 3 days, and then it became a legal matter. And legal matters in Albemarle County in the summer of 1817 moved exactly as fast as Silas Crow wanted them to move, because Silas Crow had been buying judges the way other men bought tobacco seed, quietly, steadily, 1 season at a time. Eleanor spent those 3 days going through every paper her father had ever signed. She found the original loan documents. She found the receipts for partial payments. She found a letter her father had written to Crow in 1814, requesting an extension, written in the careful, slightly formal hand of a man who knew he was asking a favor and hated every word of it. She found a second letter, never sent in, which Thomas Whitmore had written. "I do not trust this man, but I do not know what else to do." She found nothing that would void the clause. She found nothing that would save her. What she found instead at the bottom of the last box, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with brown twine, was her mother's pearl earrings and a note in her father's handwriting that said, "Only for Eleanor. She'll know when." She wore them to the Ashford ball. Margaret Ashford had been hosting the summer ball at Ashford Manor every July for 15 years, and this year was no different. Candlelight violins, the smell of beeswax and cut roses, the particular sound of Virginia society at its most comfortable and most merciless. Eleanor had attended every year since she was 17. She had always come on her father's arm. Tonight, she came alone in pale yellow silk with her mother's pearls, and she had told herself the whole ride over that she was coming because solutions did not present themselves to women who stayed home and panicked. She was coming because Colonel Marsh might be here. She was coming because Reverend Tilbury knew her father and might know something useful. She was coming because doing something, anything, was better than sitting at that kitchen table reading the same 4 pages until the words stopped meaning anything. She was not coming because she was desperate. She was absolutely desperate. She made it through the front entrance and halfway across the ballroom before she understood that no one here was going to help her. She could see it in the way conversations shifted when she approached. The small, almost invisible realignment of bodies. The eyes that met hers and then moved just slightly away. The Henderson women near the fireplace, who had been her mother's friends for 30 years, who smiled warmly and asked how she was holding up and did not once mention Silas Crow's name. which meant they already knew and had already decided there was nothing to be done. Eleanor. Margaret Ashford caught her near the punch bowl and pressed a cheek to hers. You look lovely. Your father would have been so proud. Thank you, Margaret. Are you? Margaret hesitated. Her eyes did a quick, careful sweep of the room and came back. Are you all right, dear Truly? I'm fine, Eleanor said. Truly. She wasn't, but that was not Margaret's problem to solve. She kept moving. She was looking for Colonel Marsh. She had spotted his wife near the windows, but not him when she heard two women behind her just close enough. Crow filed the paperwork yesterday, I was told. The clerk already stamped it. Poor girl. What can she do? Really, the law is the law. Well, she ought to have married someone years ago. Her father always said she was too particular. Eleanor walked faster. That was when she saw him. He was standing alone near one of the columns at the far side of the room, slightly apart from the nearest cluster of guests, holding a glass he hadn't touched, watching the room the way a man watches weather coming in off a mountain. Not bored, not entertained, measuring. He was tall, dark coat, plain cut, broad through the shoulders. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their years outdoors riding long distances doing hard things under open sky. His hair was dark and a little long. He looked like he had come to this party because someone had asked him to, not because he wanted to be here. He looked in that moment like the only person in the room who was not performing. Eleanor did not know his name. She did not know anything about him. She knew only that he was standing 10 feet away and that Silas Crow had just walked through the front entrance. She heard Crow before she saw him. That particular sound, the slight drag of his left heel, the murmur of greetings he received from men who owed him favors. She turned just enough to confirm it. There he was, dark coat well cut, leather satchel at his side, pale eyes already moving across the room. Finding her. He smiled. And Eleanor Whitmore stopped calculating and started moving. She closed the distance to the stranger in 10 steps, grabbed his arm with both hands, hard, no hesitation. Felt him go still beneath her grip, not startled, just attentive. Please. She kept her voice low and even. Pretend to be my husband. Right now. I will explain everything after I swear it, but I need you to do this right now or I lose everything. He looked down at her hands on his sleeve. He looked at her face. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask for time to think. He read her the way a man reads terrain, quick, thorough, decisive, and what he found there apparently settled the question. All right, he said. Low voice. Blue Ridge vowels, flat and certain. Stay close. His left hand came over hers, where it gripped his sleeve. Not gripping back, just covering. Warm and steady the way you'd cover a candle flame against the wind. Crow reached them 40 seconds later. Miss Whitmore? His voice was professionally warm, the particular warmth of a man who had practiced it until it sounded almost real. I've been hoping to catch you this evening. I believe my letter explained the situation, but I thought perhaps a conversation. My wife received your letter. The stranger didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his weight. He turned toward Crow with the absolute unhurried calm of a man who has never needed to announce himself in a room. She has no business discussing legal matters with another man without me present. Crow's smile held its shape for one beat too long. I wasn't aware, he said carefully, that Miss Whitmore had... Mrs. Blackwood, the stranger said. The name moved through the ballroom like a stone dropped in still water. Eleanor felt it before she heard it. The ripple of recognition, the sudden sharp intake of breath from a woman 2 feet away, the rustle of whispers spreading outward in every direction. Blackwood. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know that name. She was still holding his arm and still standing her ground and still trying to understand what had just happened when she saw Silas Crow's face do something she had never seen it do before. Go uncertain. Just for a moment. Just a flicker behind those pale eyes, a rapid, almost panicked recalculation. The look of a man who has walked into a room expecting one thing and found something else entirely. Nathaniel Blackwood, Crow said. Not a question. An identification dragged out reluctantly the way you name something you'd rather pretend you hadn't seen. That's right. The stranger. Nathaniel inclined his head once. A single slow nod, the kind you give when someone has correctly identified the obvious. I know your name too, Crow. Heard it from some interesting people, not the kind who speak well of a man. Crow's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough. This is... He stopped, started again. The marriage claim is a legal document, properly filed. The county clerk. Can wait, Nathaniel said. Everything you filed can wait, and it will wait. He looked at Crow the way a man looks at a problem he intends to solve at his own convenience, not anyone else's. You'll hear from my solicitor. Crow stood there for one more second, held in place by the weight of something he hadn't expected, and didn't know how to move around. Then he nodded once tight, and controlled turned and walked away. Eleanor watched him go. She watched him stop near the far wall, set his satchel down, and accept a glass of punch from a passing server, with the careful movements of a man reassembling himself. He didn't look back at her. That was almost worse than if he had. You can breathe now, Nathaniel said quietly beside her. She realized she hadn't been. She exhaled, long and slow, felt her grip loosen on his sleeve she had been holding so tight her fingers ached. Thank you, she said. The words felt insufficient. She said them anyway. Don't thank me yet. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching Crow across the room with an expression she couldn't entirely read, focused, measuring the same expression he'd worn watching the room before she'd approached him. He won't stop. That man hasn't stopped at anything in his life because nobody's ever made it cost him enough. She looked up at him. You know him. I know his type. A pause. And I know his name from a land dispute 2 years ago in Augusta County. 3 families lost property they'd held for 40 years. Lost it legally, every piece of paper was in order. His voice didn't change, but something underneath it did. Legal and right aren't always the same thing. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You agreed very quickly, she said. You don't know me. No. I could have been lying, setting some kind of trap. Could have. He glanced down at her, then brief direct. You weren't. How do you know that? Because a woman setting a trap doesn't look like she's drowning. He said it simply without drama, the way you state a thing that is just true. She looks like she's hunting. You looked like you were going under. Eleanor had not cried once since her father died. Not at the funeral, not during the 3 days of reading those papers, not in the long nights sitting alone in Whitmore House, listening to the summer sounds outside, and understanding that the life she'd known was dismantling itself around her, one piece at a time. She came dangerously close right then in the middle of a ballroom full of people. She locked it down. Hard. I need to understand what I've done, she said. What we've done. Crow isn't going to simply... No, he isn't. Nathaniel set his untouched glass on a nearby table. Miss Whitmore, what you've done tonight is buy yourself time. That's all. Time and a problem Crow didn't expect. He settled his coat. Straightforward, practical. What happens next depends on what's actually in those loan documents, all of them, not just the ones Crow showed you. I'd want to see the originals. I have them, she said. At Whitmore House. He nodded once. Then I'll come by in the morning, early before the heat sets in. He picked up his hat from the nearby table where he'd apparently left it. A plain hat worn at the brim. Not a wealthy man's hat, though she already understood he was a very wealthy man. Get some rest tonight, ma'am. Or try to. Ma'am. Not Miss Whitmore. Not sweetheart, not dear. Just ma'am. Clean and plain and respectful, the way a man speaks to a woman he intends to deal with straight. She appreciated it more than she could have explained. Mr. Blackwood. She stopped him with his name. He paused. Why, truly? You could have said nothing. You could have stepped aside. You owe me nothing and you don't know me. So why? Nathaniel Blackwood looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he said, because Silas Crow had a letter in that satchel, and a smile on his face, and a man who smiles like that when he's walking toward a woman who's backed against a wall. He stopped, settled his hat onto his head with one deliberate motion. That kind of man needs to hear the word no from somebody. Figured it might as well be me. He walked to the front door and out into the Virginia night, Eleanor stood alone in the Ashford hallway for a long moment, chest still tight. Hands unclenched her mother's pearls, cool against her neck. Around her, the ball continued its comfortable noise violins. Laughter, the sound of Virginia society at ease with itself. She turned and walked back into the ballroom. Every pair of eyes in the room tracked her the moment she appeared in the doorway. She kept her chin level. She kept her pace even. She crossed the room to retrieve her shawl from the chair near the window where she'd left it, and she felt the difference in the air around her, felt it the way you feel a change in weather before the wind actually shifts. They were not looking at her with pity, not a single one of them. She picked up her shawl, folded it over her arm, and walked out of Ashford Manor into the dark, warm, lightning-charged Virginia night toward whatever morning was going to bring. Nathaniel Blackwood arrived at Whitmore House at 7 in the morning, not 8. Not 9. 7 before the summer heat had fully committed itself to the day before the field hands had finished their first water break, before Eleanor had done anything more than drink half a cup of coffee and stare at the stack of her father's papers she'd laid out on the dining table the night before. She heard the horse first, then boots on the porch steps, then a single knock, not loud, not tentative. The knock of a man who had decided to be somewhere and was now there. She opened the door herself. Martha was already in the kitchen making noise with pots, which was Martha's way of expressing that she disapproved of early morning visitors and intended to feed them anyway. Nathaniel stood on the porch with his worn hat in his hand and a leather satchel over one shoulder that was considerably larger than the one Silas Crowe had carried to the ball. He looked like he'd already been awake for hours. He probably had. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Blackwood?" She stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. He looked at the dining table at the papers laid out in careful rows, the receipts stacked separately from the correspondence, the loan documents in the center with her handwritten notes in the margins, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. "You've already organized them," he said. "I've been organizing them for 3 days," she said. "Sit down. Martha will bring coffee." He sat. He set his satchel on the floor beside the chair. He looked at the papers again, and Eleanor watched him look, because she had learned a long time ago that you could tell a great deal about a person by what they looked at first. He went straight to the loan documents. Not the receipts, not the correspondence. The original instrument. He picked it up, turned it over, examined the back, and then turned to page 4. She knew exactly what he was looking at. "You found the clause," she said. "I knew about the clause before I came," he said. He set the document down. "Crowe has used it before." The coffee cup she'd been reaching for stopped halfway to her lips. "He's done this before," she repeated. Not a question. A slow, cold understanding arriving all at once. "Once that I know of directly." Nathaniel opened his own satchel and pulled out a folder thick with papers. "A woman in Augusta County. Her father died in 1814 with a debt to Crowe. The clause was in the original instrument, buried the same way, same language, same position on the 4th page. He laid the folder on the table beside her father's documents. "She married him." Eleanor set her cup down carefully. "She married Silas Crowe. She was 19 years old and had no one to advise her otherwise." His voice was even, just facts stated plainly. But underneath the evenness was something compressed and controlled the way a man sounds when he's been angry about something for a long time and has learned not to let it run loose. The estate transferred entirely to his name within 6 months of the wedding. She died 2 years later. Fever, they said. The dining room was very quiet. "You've been watching him," Eleanor said. "I've been building a case," Nathaniel said. "Slowly, carefully. Because a man like Crowe doesn't go down easy, he goes down legal, or he doesn't go down at all." He looked at her directly. "Your father's papers might be what I've been missing." She looked at the stack between them, then back at him. "Then let's get to work," she said. They worked for 4 hours straight. Martha brought coffee and then biscuits, and then around noon, a plate of cold ham and cornbread that she set down without comment. Nathaniel ate without looking up from the documents. Eleanor ate without tasting anything. They talked the whole time, Not small talk, not pleasantries, but the kind of rapid, purposeful conversation that happens between two people who are both trying to solve the same problem and have both already done their homework. He knew land law. She knew numbers. Between the two of them, the picture that emerged from Thomas Whitmore's papers was both clearer and darker than Eleanor had expected. Look at this. She pushed the 1813 receipt across the table. Daddy made a payment in March of that year, $200, but it doesn't appear in Crow's ledger, this ledger. She pushed another document across. The one Crow submitted to the county clerk as the official record of the debt. Nathaniel looked at both documents, said nothing for a long moment. "The payment was made," he said. "The handwriting on the receipt matches your father's other correspondence. Same pen, same ink, same hand. And Crow's ledger doesn't show it. Which means Crow's ledger has been altered." He set both papers down side by side. "That's not a civil matter. That's fraud." Something shifted in Eleanor's chest. Not relief, not quite, but the first solid ground she'd felt under her feet in 3 days. "Can we prove it? We can show the discrepancy." He picked up the receipt, held it to the light from the window. "Whether we can prove intent depends on how many more of these we find." He looked at her. "Keep going." She kept going. They found 3 more receipts that didn't appear in Crow's ledger. $40 in September 1812. $60 in the spring of 1814. A payment of $120 in the summer of 1815, which was the largest single payment her father had ever made. Which meant it should have been one of the easiest to trace, and it was entirely deliberately absent from the official record. The total missing payments came to $420. $420 that Thomas Whitmore had paid, and that Silas Crow had pocketed and erased. Eleanor did the arithmetic on the back of an envelope, sat back, looked at the number, felt something she hadn't felt in days: anger. Clean and clarifying, and very, very cold. "He stole from my father," she said. "And then he used the inflated debt to come after me. That's what the documents suggest." Nathaniel folded his hands on the table. Practical. Steady. "It's a strong pattern. It's not yet a conviction." "What else do we need?" "A judge who isn't in his pocket," Nathaniel said. The word landed in the room like a stone. Eleanor had known it. She had understood it intellectually since reading about the Augusta County case in the folder he'd brought. But hearing it said plainly that simply a judge who isn't in his pocket made the full shape of what they were facing arrive all at once. Crow hadn't just committed fraud. He had constructed an entire system around himself, layer by layer, year by year, bought loyalty, here buried evidence, there placed allies in exactly the right offices, until the machinery of the law in this county moved when he told it to move. "How many judges?" she asked. "In Albemarle County, 2, that I know of for certain." He paused. "Judge Aldrich is clean." She thought of Aldrich at the ball last night. His wife on his arm. The careful, measured way he'd looked at Eleanor when she crossed the room. Not the look of a compromised man. The look of a man who knew something was wrong and was waiting to see what anyone intended to do about it. "Can we get before Aldrich?" she asked. "We can try." Nathaniel reached across the table and gathered the fraudulent ledger and the 3 missing receipts into a separate stack. "But Crow will move first if he thinks we're building a case. And he'll know he always knows. He has people watching this county the way other men watch the weather. Then we need to move faster than he does." Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. Then very briefly something that wasn't quite a smile moved across his face. Not amusement exactly. More like recognition, the expression of a man who has found something he wasn't expecting and is quietly recalibrating. "Yes," he said. "We do." He stood. Picked up the key documents, the receipts, the fraudulent ledger entries, the clause from the original loan instrument, and arranged them in his satchel with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who treated evidence the way other men treated money. Like it had weight. Like losing it would cost something real. "I'm going to ride to Charlottesville this afternoon," he said. "There's a solicitor there, James Whitfield. He's worked against Crow before, and he's still standing, which tells you something about his quality. I want his eyes on these before we take anything to Aldrich. And in the meantime, he stopped. looked at her with that direct measuring look she was already beginning to recognize as simply how he looked at things he was trying to understand. Crow is going to hear about last night, if he hasn't already. He's going to start asking questions about you and about me and about how long we've supposedly been married. And when the answers don't add up, he'll accelerate, file additional paperwork, try to move the original claim through the court before we can respond. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Barely visible. Which is why I need to ask you something. Miss Whitmore and I need you to answer me straight. I'll answer you straight, she said. Because she would. What do you want? He said. Not what you need, not what the law requires or what's practical or what makes sense. What do you actually want out of all this? She hadn't expected that question. She looked at him, at this man she had known for less than 24 hours, who had come to her door at 7 in the morning with a folder full of evidence and sat across her family's dining table for 4 hours, helping her read her dead father's papers. And she gave him the honest answer. I want my father's name cleared, she said. I want proof that he paid what he could, that he wasn't a careless man who left his daughter to ruin. I want Silas Crow to answer for what he's done, not just to me, but to that woman in Augusta County, and whoever else he's done this to. She paused. And I want to keep this house. Nathaniel nodded. Once. Slowly. All right, he said. Then here's what I'm going to propose. He said it without drama, without preamble. The way he said everything directly, plainly, as if the words were just tools and he was choosing the right ones for the job. A legal marriage. Temporary. Documented with a clear and binding agreement that she retained full control of Whitmore House and its grounds. No transfer of property. No authority over her finances or her decisions. A legal union that existed for the sole purpose of making Crow's marriage claim impossible to prosecute, because you could not force an already married woman to satisfy a debt through marriage. The moment the claim is voided and Crow is before a court for the fraud, he said, we file for annulment, clean, no complications, your name, your property, and your life exactly as you want them. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. That is a significant thing you're offering, she said carefully. It's a practical solution to a specific problem, he said. You'd be tying your name to a legal dispute. Crow will come after you. Crow has been trying to come after me for 2 years over a timber rights deal he lost fair and square. The flatness in his voice said he found that more irritating than frightening. He can try harder. Why would you do this? She asked. She needed to ask it again. Needed to hear it again in daylight at a dining table with her father's papers spread between them, rather than in a crowded ballroom with Crow bearing down. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Because I've been building a case against Silas Crow for 2 years, he said. And I've been missing the piece that connects his fraudulent ledgers to a specific victim willing to stand in court and say what was done to them. He looked at her. You're that piece, Miss Whitmore, and I reckon you're strong enough to stand. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months. She looked at the papers on the table, the receipts with her father's careful handwriting, the missing payments, the forged ledger, the clause on the 4th page that had been written by a man who had planned this from the beginning, planned it with patience and precision, and the absolute confidence of someone who had never once been held accountable for anything. She thought of the woman in Augusta County, 19 years old, no one to advise her. She thought of her father's unsent letter. I do not trust this man, but I do not know what else to do. When would we need to file? She asked. Tomorrow, Nathaniel said, before Crow moves. Tomorrow. She said the word slowly, feeling the weight of it. Then she straightened, set her hands flat on the table. Then we file tomorrow. Something moved through Nathaniel's expression, brief, controlled. She got the sense that he was not a man who showed relief easily, but it was there. A fractional easing around his eyes, like a man who has been carrying something heavy and has just found somewhere solid to set it down. I'll have the agreement drafted by tonight, he said. Whitfield can witness it. I'll have Martha press my good dress, Eleanor said. He almost smiled at that. Not quite, but almost. He was at the door, hat in hand, when Martha appeared from the kitchen with a wrapped package of cornbread and what she claimed was leftover ham, which was definitely not leftover, and which she pressed into his hands with the expression of a woman who has formed an opinion and intends to act on it regardless of anyone else's input. "You come back now," Martha said to him. Like it was settled, he looked at the package, looked at Martha. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost surprised, like a man who had not been mothered in a long time and wasn't sure what to do with it. Eleanor walked him to the porch. The summer heat was fully committed now, the air thick and still, the fields beyond the house shimmering at their edges. Somewhere down the road, a woodpecker was working at a dead oak. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary morning. Nothing about it was ordinary. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. He turned. "If this goes wrong—" She stopped. Started again. "If Crow has more reach than you think, if Aldrich can't be trusted, or the paperwork doesn't hold, or he finds a way around it, then we find another way," Nathaniel said. Simple, complete, like it was not a question of if, but only of which route. Crow's been winning for 20 years because nobody's made it expensive enough for him to lose. He settled his hat. "I intend to make it very expensive." He rode out. Eleanor stood on the porch and watched him go, and she was doing what she always did, calculating, assessing, measuring the shape of the problem against the shape of the solution. But underneath that, underneath all of it, was something else. Something she hadn't felt since before her father got sick. Since before the bad harvests and the borrowed money and the slow, quiet disaster of the last 3 years. Something that felt dangerously unexpectedly like hope. She went back inside. She had a lot left to read. And somewhere in Charlottesville, she was almost certain Silas Crow was already hearing about last night and starting to move. The wedding took place on a Thursday morning in Judge Aldrich's private office with James Whitfield as witness, and Martha as the only other person in the room. Martha cried. She would deny it for the rest of her life, but she cried. Eleanor did not cry. She stood beside Nathaniel Blackwood in her good dress, the dark green one. The one her father had always said made her look like she meant business, and she said the words the law required her to say in a clear, steady voice. And when it was done, she shook Judge Aldrich's hand and signed her name on 3 separate documents and felt more than anything else the particular calm of a woman who has made a decision and committed to it fully. Nathaniel signed beside her. His handwriting was plain and direct like his voice. No flourishes. Outside the office in the corridor, he handed her a folded document, the private agreement the one Whitfield had drafted the night before, and both of them had signed separately that morning before the ceremony. Full ownership of Whitmore House remained hers. No financial authority transferred. The terms of dissolution were written out in plain language at the bottom of the page. "Keep that somewhere safe," he said. "I intend to." She folded it into her bag. What now? Now Whitfield files the marriage certificate with the county clerk before noon. He settled his hat. Crow will know by afternoon. And the fraud case. Whitfield is taking the receipts to Aldrich today, separately, officially. He looked at her. "It's moving, Miss Whitmore. It's slow, but it's moving." She nodded. That was enough. It had to be enough. It was not enough. 3 days after the wedding, a notice arrived from Crow's legal office not addressed to Eleanor, but to Nathaniel. A counter-filing challenging the validity of the marriage on the grounds that it had been conducted under fraudulent pretense. 2 pages of dense legal language that boiled down, Eleanor understood after reading it twice to Silas Crow, telling the county court that this marriage was a scheme, and he intended to prove it. She brought the notice to Nathaniel at Blackwood Farm that afternoon, riding out herself rather than sending a messenger because some things needed to be said face to face. He was in the horse barn when she arrived, working alongside 2 of his men on something involving a wheel and a considerable amount of controlled frustration. He saw her come in, said something to the men that sent them to the other end of the barn, and walked toward her wiping his hands on a cloth. She handed him the notice without preamble. He read it. His face didn't change. That was she was learning how you knew something had landed, not by what his face did, but by the quality of stillness that came over him, like a man absorbing a blow without stepping back. "He moved faster than I expected," he said. "Is he right?" she asked. "Can he challenge the marriage on those grounds?" "He can try." Nathaniel folded the notice. "He'd have to prove intent to defraud the court. That's a high bar." He looked at her. "It's also an attempt to rattle us into making a mistake." "Are we rattled? Are you?" "No," she said, and meant it. He almost smiled. "Then we're fine." But they were not fine, not entirely. Because 2 days after that, one of Whitfield's junior clerks, a young man named Pell, who had been with the firm for less than a year, disappeared. He had been the clerk responsible for filing the fraud evidence with Aldrich's office. He had been the only person outside of Whitfield, Nathaniel, and Eleanor who knew the exact contents of the receipts and the specific discrepancies in Crow's ledgers. He left no note. He left behind a half-eaten breakfast and a week's pay uncollected. Whitfield came to Whitmore House himself to tell Eleanor. He was a measured man, cautious with words, but his face when he sat down at her dining table said everything his careful language was trying not to. "The filing was completed before Pell disappeared," Whitfield said. "The evidence is with Aldrich. That hasn't changed." "But someone convinced that young man to run," Eleanor said. Whitfield was quiet. "Or convinced him to do something worse," she said. "We don't know that," Whitfield said carefully. "No." Eleanor agreed. "We don't know that." She told Nathaniel that evening when he rode over. She watched his face do that thing again that controlled stillness, that absorption. He stood in her parlor with his hat in his hands and listened to every word without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Who knew about the filing outside of the four of us? Whitfield is asking the same question." "It isn't a coincidence." His voice had gone very flat. The particular flatness of a man who is being careful with his anger because he knows what happens when he isn't. Crow has someone inside Whitfield's office. Has had someone there maybe for a long time. Then Aldrich. Aldrich already has the evidence. It's already filed. Crow can't unfile it. He looked at her. But he can make the case harder to prosecute. Witnesses who won't speak. Documents that go missing before they're needed. A clerk who might resurface with a different story than the one we need him to tell. Eleanor sat down. Not because she was weak, because she needed to think, and she thought better when she wasn't standing up trying to look composed. "He's been doing this for 20 years, she said, "building this system, and we've had 3 weeks. "Yes." "Tell me we have something he can't touch." Nathaniel sat down across from her. Not the chair at the far end of the table, the one closer to her, the one Whitfield had been sitting in an hour ago. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for a moment he looked less like the most powerful landowner in Virginia, and more like a man who was also tired and also angry, and was also trying to figure out the next move. "Your father's original receipts," he said. "The physical documents. Crow can discredit copies, he can pressure witnesses, but those receipts exist in your father's own handwriting, and Crow cannot explain them away if we get them in front of Aldrich directly." He paused. "Where are they?" "In the strong box in my father's study, locked." "Keep them there. Don't move them. Don't tell anyone where they are." "I haven't." "Good." He held her gaze. Eleanor. It was the first time he'd used her given name. He didn't seem to notice he'd done it, which somehow made it more significant than if he had. "I need to go through the rest of your father's papers," he said. "Everything. Not just the financial records, the correspondence, the personal letters, anything he kept. Crow planned this for years, and that means there's a paper trail somewhere. Men like him always leave one. They're too careful not to." "That'll take days," she said. "Then we start tomorrow." They started tomorrow. Nathaniel came every morning that week and stayed until the light failed. They worked at the dining table, the way they had that first day. Methodically, systematically. 2 people who had both grown up understanding that most problems could be broken down into their components if you were willing to sit with them long enough. Martha fed them. The summer heat pressed against the windows. Outside, the tobacco in the east field was coming along, which was the one ordinary thing happening at Whitmore House. and Eleanor found herself grateful for it in a way she couldn't entirely explain. On the third day, she found the box. It was at the back of her father's wardrobe behind his good winter coats, inside a leather satchel she had never seen before. Small, plain, locked with a simple clasp. She opened it with the same letter knife she'd used on Crow's notice because the clasp was old and the leather was soft and it gave without much resistance. Inside were two things. The first was a letter, written in her father's hand, dated 18 months before his death, addressed to no one, or rather, addressed to whoever might find this. If something happens to me, which was enough to make Eleanor sit down on the floor of the wardrobe and press her back against the wall and breathe for a moment before she could read it. She read it. Then she carried it downstairs to where Nathaniel was working and set it in front of him without a word. He read it. The room was very quiet. The letter said three things. First, Thomas Whitmore had discovered in the spring of 1815 that Crow was falsifying the payment records. He had confronted Crow directly, not with a lawyer, not with evidence, just two men in a room, and Crow had told him calmly, and without apparent concern, that no judge in Albemarle County would take the word of a man with outstanding debt over the word of Silas Crow, and that Thomas would do well to remember he had a daughter who was still unmarried and therefore still vulnerable. Second, Thomas Whitmore had tried to collect evidence. He had spoken to two other men who had borrowed from Crow. One had refused to speak further and moved his family to Kentucky 3 weeks later. The other had agreed to write a statement and then died a riding accident, they said 6 weeks after making that agreement. Third, Thomas Whitmore believed Silas Crow had arranged that accident. Nathaniel set the letter down carefully. His hands were completely steady. His face was completely still. He knew, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady too. She was operating somewhere below, feeling right now some cooler, cleaner place. He knew all of it, and he had no way to prove it, and he knew Crow would come for me when he was gone. He tried to protect you, Nathaniel said. He tried. She looked at the letter. He didn't know how. He wrote it down. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. He left a record. He didn't know who would find it, but he left it there because he knew that someday someone needed to know. He looked at her. He trusted that you'd be the one to find it. Eleanor had not cried once since her father died. She cried now. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a few moments with her hands flat on the table and her head down, and Nathaniel sat across from her and didn't say anything and didn't look away, which was exactly the right thing to do. She lifted her head after a minute, wiped her face with the back of her hand. The second thing in the box, she said. Nathaniel looked at her. There's a second thing. She went back upstairs and brought it down. It was a ledger, small, leather-bound, water-stained at the corner. Her father's handwriting filled every page. Every payment he had ever made to Silas Crow, recorded in meticulous detail, date amount, the name of the person who had received the payment, and in several cases, the name of the witness present. Every single transaction for 6 years. Cross-referenced against Crow's official ledger, it didn't just suggest fraud. It proved it. Not circumstantially, not by implication, it proved it the way a map proves a territory. Here is what happened. Here are the dates. Here are the names. Nathaniel turned the pages slowly. Eleanor watched him read. She watched him reach the entry from September 1812, $40, exactly the amount missing from Crow's official record. And she watched his jaw tighten and his hand go still on the page. Thomas Whitmore, he said quietly, was a thorough man. He kept records of everything, Eleanor said. I used to tease him about it. He kept receipts for seed and lumber and horseshoe nails. Her voice was rough at the edges. She didn't try to smooth it out. I didn't know he was keeping records of this. He was protecting you the only way he knew how. Nathaniel closed the ledger, held it for a moment. This goes to Aldrich tomorrow, directly. Not through Whitfield's office, directly in our hands with both of us present. Crow will know we have it. Crow will know we have it the moment we walk into that courthouse, Nathaniel said. And the moment we walk into that courthouse with this ledger, everything changes. He set it down on the table between them. He can't make this disappear. He can't buy his way around your father's handwriting in a room with a clean judge who's already seen the receipts. The whole structure he's built starts coming down. You're certain? He looked at her. I'm certain we've done everything right. I'm certain the evidence is real. I'm certain Aldrich is a man of integrity. A pause. I am not certain what Crow will do when he understands he's losing. That sentence settled in the room like smoke. Because that was the thing neither of them had said yet. Not directly. Not out loud. Silas Crow had operated for 20 years without consequence. He had bought judges, forged documents, threatened witnesses, and if her father's letter was to be believed, arranged a man's death when that man became inconvenient. He was not going to watch a legal case build against him and accept it calmly. He was not going to stand in a courtroom and go quietly. He was going to do something. They didn't know what. But that evening when Nathaniel rode home, and Eleanor sat alone in her father's study with the leather-bound ledger on her lap and the summer insects loud against the windows, she understood that the case against Crow was no longer just about saving her house or clearing her father's name. It had become something larger, something more dangerous. And somewhere in Charlottesville, she was almost certain Silas Crow had already felt the ground shift beneath him. She locked the ledgers in the strongbox beside the receipts. She locked the strongbox. And then she did something she had never done before in her entire life at Whitmore House. She locked the front door. She stood in the hallway for a moment, key in her hand, listening to the ordinary night sounds of the house. The tick of the clock, the creak of old wood settling Martha moving in her room down the hall. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. The letter she'd found upstairs was still on the dining table. She went and picked it up, folded it carefully, and held it for a long moment. Her father had sat in this house alone, knowing what he knew, with no one to tell, and no way to fight, and a daughter he was trying to protect. She was not alone. She set the letter down and went to find something to eat because tomorrow was going to be a very long day, and she intended to be completely, absolutely ready for it. 3 doors down, in a rented room above a Charlottesville tavern, a young man named Pell was reading a letter that had been slipped under his door that morning. He read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his coat pocket, and sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, staring at nothing. The letter was from Silas Crow. It contained a bank draft for $200 and 1 sentence of instruction. Tell them you made a mistake about what you filed. Pell sat there for a long time. Then he stood up, put on his coat, and walked out into the Charlottesville night, not toward the postal office, not toward Whitfield's firm, toward Judge Aldrich's house. Because some decisions once made have to be made all the way. Pell walked into Judge Aldrich's house at 9:30 that evening and didn't leave until midnight. Eleanor didn't know any of that until the following morning, when Whitfield arrived at Whitmore House, before she'd finished her first cup of coffee, knocked twice fast, and came through the door with the look of a man carrying news that could go either direction. Pell came forward, Whitfield said. Eleanor set her cup down. He came forward. Last night. Went directly to Aldrich's home. Brought the letter Crow sent him, the bank draft, the instruction, all of it. Whitfield sat down without being invited, which told her how significant this was. He said he spent 2 hours sitting in that rented room, deciding what kind of man he intended to be. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. How old is he? She asked. 22. She thought about that. 22 years old, $200 in his pocket, and Silas Crow's instruction in his hand. She thought about how easy it would have been to simply take the money and disappear. Start somewhere new. Tell himself it wasn't his fight. Where is he now? She asked. Aldrich has him, keeping him close until the hearing. Whitfield leaned forward. Eleanor, this changes the shape of the case entirely. Crow just handed us evidence of witness tampering on top of everything else. Aldrich can move now, not just on the fraud claim, but on criminal conduct. When he set a hearing for Friday. Friday was 4 days away. She sent a rider to Blackwood Farm immediately. Nathaniel arrived within the hour, and she told him everything while he stood in her hallway, still dusty from the road hat in hand, listening with that complete focused attention that she had come to rely on in ways she hadn't fully accounted for yet. When she finished, he was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Crow will know by this afternoon, he said. Whitfield said the same thing. Then we need to move the ledger. She looked at him. Move it where? Not here. His voice was even, but underneath it was that compressed urgency she recognized, now the sound of a man thinking 3 steps ahead and not liking what he sees at step 4. If Crow knows the hearing is Friday, and he knows what we have the strongbox in your father's study is the first place he'll think of. We need those documents somewhere he can't reach them. Aldrich's office is the right answer, but we can't walk them through Charlottesville in broad daylight without Crow's people seeing. He looked at her steadily. Tonight, after dark. I'll take them myself. I'll come with you. Eleanor. They're my father's documents, she said. I'll come with you. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. After dark, then. The day between that moment and nightfall was the longest Eleanor could remember since the 3 days after she'd read Crow's letter. She went through the motions of the afternoon, reviewed the East Field accounts with the foreman, wrote 2 letters. She'd been putting off ate dinner with Martha, who talked about everything except what was actually happening, which was Martha's way of keeping the air in the house breathable. At 8 o'clock, Nathaniel came back. Quietly. No lantern. They took the ledger and the receipts from the strongbox, wrapped them in oilcloth, and rode to Charlottesville in the dark on 2 horses, with no conversation beyond the necessary. The road was familiar, and the night was clear, and Eleanor focused on the rhythm of the horse under her, and the oilcloth package in her saddlebag, and the particular quality of calm that comes when there is something specific to do, and you are doing it. Aldrich answered his door himself. He looked at the 2 of them, looked at the package, and stepped back to let them in without a word. They stayed 20 minutes. Long enough to transfer the documents, sign a chain of custody record that Whitfield had prepared, and watch Aldrich lock the ledger in his own safe with his own key. Friday morning, Aldrich said when they were at the door. 8 o'clock. He looked at Eleanor specifically. You'll need to be present. Your testimony about finding the ledger will be required. I'll be there, she said. He nodded. Get some rest. He said it the way men said things they knew were probably useless advice but meant anyway. They rode back in the same silence they'd ridden out in. It was only when they reached the turning where the road to Blackwood Farm split off from the road to Whitmore House that Nathaniel pulled up, and Eleanor pulled up beside him, and they sat there for a moment in the dark. We did everything right, she said, not asking, just saying it out loud because it needed to be said. We did everything right, he agreed. Then why does it still feel like something's about to go wrong? He was quiet for a moment. Because Crow hasn't done his worst yet, he said. And we both know it. He was right. They both knew it. She found out how right he was 2 days later. It arrived on a Wednesday. Not at Whitmore House at Blackwood Farm, delivered by hand to Nathaniel's foreman at 6 in the morning, addressed in handwriting none of them recognized. The foreman brought it to Nathaniel at breakfast. Nathaniel read it once, put it in his coat pocket, and finished his coffee before he did anything else, which was how she knew later that he had needed that moment to decide how to handle what he'd read. He came to Whitmore House by 9. He set the letter on the dining table in front of her. She read it. It was 2 pages, no signature. But the language was unmistakably legal, precise, structured, the kind of prose that comes from someone who has spent years in courtrooms and knows exactly how to wound with words. The letter claimed that Eleanor Whitmore had approached Nathaniel Blackwood at the Ashford Ball not out of desperation, but as part of a deliberate scheme. That she had known who he was before she grabbed his arm. That she had researched his ongoing dispute with Silas Crow, and calculated that his name and his resources could be weaponized against her creditor. That the entire performance, the fear, the urgency, the whispered plea, had been theater carefully staged by a woman who was not a victim, but an operator. It claimed she had never intended to honor the terms of their private agreement. That she had already consulted with a solicitor in Richmond about how to use the temporary marriage to gain permanent claim on Nathaniel's property through a separate legal mechanism Eleanor had never heard of and did not understand. And it claimed this was the part that made her stomach drop straight through the floor, that there was a witness. A guest at the Ashford Ball, who would testify to having heard Eleanor earlier that same evening describe Nathaniel Blackwood by name and discuss exactly how she planned to approach him. Eleanor read it twice. Then she set it down. Her hands were steady. She made them steady. "This is not true," she said. "I know that," Nathaniel said. She looked up at him. He was standing on the other side of the table, watching her with that direct, measuring look, and there was nothing in his expression that looked like doubt, not a shadow of it. "You know that," she repeated. "I knew who you were before you grabbed my arm," he said. "I told you that. I'd heard your father's name. I knew about the debt. I had been watching Crow work that room from the moment I arrived." He paused. "What I saw when you walked toward me was a woman who had run out of options and was making the only move she had left. That is not the face of someone running a scheme. That is the face of someone who is genuinely afraid and genuinely out of time." Something in Eleanor's chest unlocked a tension she hadn't even fully identified until it released. She breathed. "Crow wrote this," she said, "or paid someone to write it." "Yes." "The witness doesn't exist or exists and will say whatever they've been paid to say." He sat down. "Either way, he's sending it somewhere. This is a copy. The original went somewhere else. To Whitfield, maybe. To Aldrich. To someone whose opinion of you matters to this case." Eleanor looked at the letter again. "Read the part about the Richmond solicitor." "This is specific," she said slowly. "This isn't just general character assassination. This is specific enough that someone is going to ask for records. They're going to go looking for this solicitor in Richmond." "And they won't find one," Nathaniel said, "because there isn't one. But by the time they establish that what happens to Friday's hearing—" He was quiet. "It gets complicated," she said. "At minimum. At worst—" She stopped. "Aldrich is a careful man. He's a fair man. But if this letter reaches him before Friday with a named witness attached to it, he has to consider it. He has to." She pressed her fingers flat on the tabletop. "That's what Crow is doing. He's not trying to win. He's trying to delay long enough to find another angle." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "That's exactly what he's doing." "So what do we do?" Nathaniel looked at the letter, then at her. Then he said, "We find the witness first." They found her by Thursday afternoon. Her name was Cecilia Vane, and she was 30 years old, and she had been at the Ashford ball. Eleanor remembered her vaguely, a woman in blue near the fireplace, who had not been part of any group Eleanor knew well. She lived in a boarding house on the north end of Charlottesville, and she had, according to the inquiry Nathaniel's solicitor ran in 12 focused hours, received a payment of $50 from a Charlottesville bank account that traced back through 2 intermediaries to a firm Silas Crow used for what his bookkeeper, Nathaniel's source inside Crow's operation, a man who had been quietly furious about what he'd witnessed for 3 years, called his difficult transactions. $50 to say she'd heard Eleanor speak Nathaniel's name. Nathaniel went to the boarding house himself. Eleanor insisted on coming. He didn't argue this time. Cecilia Vane answered the door and took one look at the two of them and went the color of old ash. "I haven't said anything yet," she said immediately. "I haven't gone anywhere or talked to anyone. The letter came yesterday and I—" She stopped, pulled the door open wider. "Come in." She had the letter on her table, unopened. Still sealed with the wax from the messenger who delivered it, the instruction letter from Crow's people explaining what she was supposed to say and when she was supposed to say it. "I grew up poor," she said. She was looking at the table, not at them. $50 is more than I make in 4 months. And the man who brought the letter, he was very clear about what happened to people who took the money and then changed their minds. She swallowed. "But I have been sitting with this since yesterday, and I cannot—" Her voice broke slightly. She steadied it. "I cannot say I heard something I did not hear." Eleanor sat down across from her without being invited. "What did you actually hear?" Cecilia looked at her. "Nothing. I saw you across the room and I saw you walking fast and I saw you grab that man's arm and I thought that woman is frightened. That's all. That's all I saw." "Will you say that?" Eleanor asked. "In front of Judge Aldrich on Friday. Will you say exactly what you just said to me?" Cecilia was quiet for a long moment. "Crow's man said—" "I know what Crow's man said," Eleanor said. Her voice was gentle, completely steady. I'm asking what you'll say, because there is a court hearing tomorrow morning, and a man who has been committing fraud for 20 years, and bribing witnesses and destroying families, and right now, you are the only person in this situation who has a choice that is entirely yours." Cecilia looked at the unopened letter on her table. Then she looked at Eleanor. "What time?" she said. 8 o'clock, Eleanor said. "Judge Aldrich's courtroom." Cecilia nodded. Once. The nod of a woman who has made a decision and means to keep it. They left the boarding house and walked out into the Charlottesville afternoon, and for the first time since finding the forged letter on her dining table, Eleanor felt the specific sensation of ground solidifying under her feet. "She'll come," Eleanor said. "She'll come?" Nathaniel agreed. They walked in silence for half a block. Then Nathaniel said without particular emphasis, "You were good in there." She glanced at him. "You didn't need to come. You could have sent your solicitor." "I know. But you came anyway." "You were going to come regardless," he said. "Figured if we were walking into something uncertain, 2 was better than 1. It was a practical answer. She recognized it as something more than practical. They stopped at the corner where the road split. He would go one direction, she another, same as 2 nights ago in the dark. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. 8 o'clock. He started to turn away, then stopped. "Eleanor." He said it the way he'd said it that afternoon in her parlor, when he'd said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight," her name as a full sentence carrying its own weight. She waited. "Whatever happens in that room tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know that nothing in that letter, not one word of it, changed anything. Not for me." She looked at him. This man she had known for less than 2 weeks. This man who had come to her door at 7 in the morning and sat across her father's table and ridden with her in the dark and stood in a strange woman's doorway while Eleanor did the talking and never once made her feel like she owed him anything for any of it. "Thank you," she said, quietly, meaning it entirely. He nodded, turned up his collar against the evening air, and walked away toward Blackwood Farm and tomorrow and whatever Silas Crow had left to throw at them. She walked back toward Whitmore House, past the county clerk's office where Crow's original claim was filed, past the law offices where Whitfield was still working by lamplight, past the courthouse where in less than 15 hours, 20 years of careful, deliberate, devastating fraud was going to have to answer to a room with a clean judge and a locked safe full of evidence. She walked home. She ate the dinner Martha had kept warm. She sat in her father's chair in the study for a while, not reading, just sitting. Then she went to bed. She slept. That was, she would think later, how she knew she was ready. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was afraid. She simply could not afford to be anything less than completely present tomorrow, and her body understood that, and it let her rest. In the morning, everything would either hold or it wouldn't. She had done everything right. She closed her eyes and slept. Aldrich opened the hearing at 8 o'clock exactly. Eleanor was already seated when the clock struck. Nathaniel beside her. Whitfield at the table to their left with the documents arranged in the order they'd agreed on the night before. Pell sat in the witness chairs along the wall, looking younger than 22, and steadier than anyone had a right to expect. Cecilia Vane was 2 seats down from him, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. Silas Crow came in at 3 minutes past 8 with 2 lawyers. Eleanor didn't recognize the particular expression of a man who has survived 20 years of difficult rooms and intends to survive this one too. He looked at Pell. Pell looked back at him and did not look away. Something moved through Crow's face, fast, controlled, gone. He sat down. Aldrich looked at the room over his glasses. "We'll begin." What followed was 4 hours that Eleanor would spend the rest of her life being unable to fully describe to anyone who wasn't there. Not because it was complicated, the evidence was clean, the testimony was clear. Whitfield had arranged everything with the precision of a man who had been waiting 2 years for this exact moment. It was the atmosphere of it. The particular compressed electricity of a room where truth is being established against the resistance of a man who has spent decades ensuring that truth bent in his direction. Whitfield presented the receipts first. Each one, dated, signed, and cross-referenced against Crow's official ledger, where the corresponding payments simply did not exist. He laid them on Aldrich's desk, one at a time, slowly letting each one land. Crow's lawyers objected twice. Aldrich overruled both times without significant deliberation. Then Whitfield presented the ledger. Thomas Whitmore's leather-bound record of every payment, every date, every witness name written in the careful hand of a man who had understood he was building a record for exactly this kind of room. Crow's lead lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the provenance of this document has been established by chain of custody signed by this court 2 days ago," Aldrich said. "Sit down, counselor." The lawyer sat down. Then Pell testified. He was clear. He was specific. He produced Crow's letter and the bank draft and described exactly what had been asked of him and exactly why he had walked to Aldrich's house instead of the postal office. He spoke for 20 minutes without contradiction because there was nothing to contradict. He had the letter, he had the draft and the account it had been drawn from, traced directly to Crow's operation through documentation. Nathaniel's solicitor had assembled, and Whitfield had submitted the previous afternoon. Crow's lawyers tried to shake him. They asked about his character, his employment history, the circumstances of his disappearance. Pell answered every question with the flat, patient steadiness of a young man who has decided he is going to tell the truth and has made peace with whatever that costs him. When Cecilia Vane testified, she said exactly what she had told Eleanor in that boarding house. She had seen a frightened woman walk across a room. She had heard nothing. She had been offered $50 to say otherwise. She declined to say otherwise. It took Crow's lawyers 6 minutes to establish that the account the $50 had come from was 3 steps removed from Crow's name on paper. It took Nathaniel's solicitor 4 minutes to demonstrate that those 3 steps all led back to the same place they always led. At 12:17 in the afternoon, Aldrich called a recess. At 12:50 he came back. The room went completely still. Aldrich looked at his papers, looked at Crow, set his glasses down on the desk with a small, deliberate sound. "The evidence presented today establishes a pattern of fraudulent record-keeping extending across a period of not less than 6 years," he said. His voice was measured and completely without drama, the way a man speaks when he has no need of drama. "The marriage clause invoked against Mrs. Blackwood is predicated on a debt figure that has been materially falsified. The clause is therefore void." He paused. "Furthermore, this court finds probable cause to refer the matter of witness tampering and fraudulent documentation to the criminal court. Mr. Crow, you will surrender your travel documents to the county sheriff before leaving this building today." Crow sat perfectly still. His lawyers were already leaning toward him, whispering. He wasn't listening to them. He was looking at Eleanor. She looked back at him, steady, completely steady. He looked away first. Whitfield's hand came down briefly on Eleanor's arm, just a touch quick and professional, the gesture of a man who has just won something he has been working toward for a long time and is allowing himself exactly 1 second to mark it. Nathaniel said nothing. But she felt him shift beside her, that fractional easing, that setting down of something heavy, and she understood without words that he felt it too. Outside the courthouse in the full heat of the Virginia summer, Whitfield shook both their hands and said he'd be in touch about the criminal proceedings and walked back inside. Because Whitfield was that kind of man, the work wasn't done, so he wasn't done. Pell was waiting near the steps. He looked at Eleanor when she came out. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did, both nights." He nodded. His jaw was tight. "My daddy was a tenant farmer," he said. "Lost his lease to a man like Crow when I was 12. He stopped. "I should have walked to Aldrich's house the first night." "You walked there when it mattered," she said. "That counts." He nodded again, went down the steps. Nathaniel stood beside her. They watched the courthouse door for a moment, half expecting something. Some additional move from Crow, some lawyer emerging with another document, some last maneuver. Nothing came. "It's over," Eleanor said, testing the words, feeling their weight. "The civil matter is over," Nathaniel said. "The criminal case will take months. But he can't touch Whitmore House. He can't touch Whitmore House." She exhaled, long and slow and complete, the way she'd exhaled in the Ashford hallway the night all of this started, but different. That exhale had been relief at immediate danger passing. This one was something else. The release of weight she had been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing it was there. "I need to tell Martha," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "She'll feed someone. She'll feed everyone within a quarter mile," Eleanor said. "She's been waiting for good news for 3 days, and she has opinions about what to do with it." He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost, and it changed his face in a way she hadn't seen before, lighter, younger, something unclenched around his eyes. She noticed. She filed it away. They parted at the road, him toward Blackwood Farm, her toward Whitmore House, the same split they had made twice before in the dark. Except this time it was midday, and the sun was high and full, and Virginia was green and loud around them, and there was nothing chasing either of them. "Nathaniel," she said. He turned. "Thank you." She said it the way she had meant to say it from the beginning, not as a courtesy, not as a formality. As a true thing stated plainly between two people who had earned the right to be plain with each other. For all of it. He held her gaze for a moment. "Your father did the work," he said. "He kept the records. He left you the truth. We just carried it to the right room." She shook her head slightly. "You know that's not all you did." He was quiet. "I know," he said finally. Quietly. And the way he said it told her he was not talking only about the legal case either. She rode home. The weeks that followed were the strangest Eleanor had known, stranger in some ways than the weeks preceding the hearing, because at least then there had been a clear enemy and a clear direction to move in. Now the direction was less obvious. The immediate threat was gone. Whitmore House was safe. The tobacco was coming in well. Martha had indeed fed everyone within a quarter mile and then started on the half mile. Life resumed its ordinary shape, except that Nathaniel Blackwood was still legally her husband. They had not discussed the annulment. Not since the morning after the wedding, when he'd handed her the private agreement and told her to keep it somewhere safe. There had been too many other things pressing too many other fires, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, the question of what came next for the two of them specifically had been set aside in favor of what came next for the case. Now the case was settled, and the question was still there. He came to Whitmore House twice that first week, once to go over the transfer of estate documents with Whitfield, once to bring by a letter from the governor's office that had apparently been addressed to them jointly, congratulating them on the resolution of the matter, in terms that suggested the governor had been watching Crow for his own reasons and was relieved someone had finally moved. Both times the visit was practical, purposeful. He didn't stay longer than the business required. Both times leaving, he paused at the door in a way that felt like a man who had something to say and had not yet decided whether to say it. She noticed. She did not push. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the hearing, she was in her father's study, going over the harvest accounts when she heard a horse on the road, and then boots on the porch steps, and then a knock. Not Martha's knock. Not Whitfield's knock. She already knew before she opened the door. Nathaniel stood on the porch. No hat. No satchel. No folder of documents or letter of business. Just himself in a plain coat, looking like a man who has ridden somewhere with a specific intention and has arrived and is now committed to it. "It's Thursday evening," Eleanor said. "It is," he agreed. "You don't have business on Thursday evenings." "No," he said. "I don't." She stepped back from the door. He came in. He stood in the hallway, the same hallway where she'd told him about Pell disappearing, where Whitfield had brought news of the counterfiling, where so many difficult conversations had started. And he looked at her with that direct, complete attention that she had come to understand was simply how he was. How he had always been. A man who looked at things fully or not at all. "The annulment paperwork," he said. "Whitfield has it ready." "I know," she said. "He told me. I haven't signed it." The hallway was quiet. "I noticed," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "I've been trying to determine whether what I want to say to you is something you want to hear," he said. "And I've concluded that I can't determine that without saying it. So I'm going to say it, and you can tell me plainly what you think, and I'll accept your answer either way." "All right," she said. Her voice was steady, her heart was not. "I don't want an annulment," he said. "Not because of the property arrangement or the legal situation or anything practical. Those reasons are gone. The case is settled. You don't need my name or my protection anymore. You haven't needed it since Aldrich read his ruling." He stopped. "I don't want an annulment because I have spent the last 6 weeks sitting across your dining table and riding in the dark beside you and watching you walk into a strange woman's doorway and talk her into doing the right thing with nothing but honesty and a steady voice. And I am not the same man I was before that. I don't know exactly when it happened. I know that it did." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "You're a man who plans things carefully," she said. "I am." "You don't say things you don't mean." "No." "And you've thought about this?" "For 3 weeks," he said, "which is, I'll admit, somewhat longer than I've thought about most decisions of comparable significance." She almost smiled. She could feel it pulling at the corner of her mouth, and she let it come. "I grew up certain I would never marry," she said. "Not because I didn't want to, because I watched my mother defer to my father on every decision she'd already made correctly on her own, and I decided I was not built for that kind of marriage." "I know," he said quietly. "The agreement we signed is still binding if you want it to be," he said. "I'm not asking you to surrender anything. Not this house, not your accounts, not your decisions about your own life." He held her gaze. "I'm asking whether you want a real marriage, with me. With a man who will argue with you when he thinks you're wrong and trust your judgment when you're right, and if you'll permit it, sit across your table for the rest of his life." The thing that moved through Eleanor's chest in that moment was not the desperate relief of the ballroom, or the cold clarity of finding the ledger, or the fierce satisfaction of watching Aldrich hand down his ruling. It was quieter than all of those things. Warmer. The particular feeling of arriving somewhere after a long road and recognizing the place. She looked at him. This man who had said all right in the middle of a crowded ballroom without knowing her name. Who had come at 7 in the morning with evidence instead of flowers. Who had ridden in the dark beside her and said 2 is better than 1, and meant it in every direction at once. "You'd have to learn," she said, "that when I've already calculated the numbers, I don't need you to calculate them again." "I'd manage," he said, "and Martha runs this house. That is not a negotiable point. I would not dream of suggesting otherwise." The flatness of his voice said he had already correctly identified that Martha ran most things she touched, and had accepted it without reservation. "And I will keep this house in my name," she said. "That's already in the agreement," he said, "which you signed and I signed and Whitfield witnessed. Nothing about that changes." Eleanor looked at him for one more moment. Then she said, "I don't want an annulment either." He exhaled. Just once. Just a single breath, that fractional release, that setting down. She had seen it after the hearing. She had seen it the morning after they'd moved the ledger. Each time it was smaller, more controlled. This time it was barely visible. She thought that was probably what Nathaniel Blackwood looked like when he was completely, quietly happy. She thought she wanted to see it for a long time. Martha, who had been entirely too quiet in the kitchen for the past 20 minutes, chose that moment to appear in the hallway with a tray of coffee and cornbread that she had obviously prepared well before anyone had knocked at the door. "Sit down," Martha said to both of them in the tone of a woman who has been waiting for something and is satisfied to have been right about it. "Food's hot." Nathaniel looked at the tray, looked at Martha. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They sat down at the dining table. The same table where they had first spread Thomas Whitmore's papers, where they had read the fraudulent ledger entries, and the forged letter, and the hidden box with her father's truth inside it. The table where Eleanor had cried once, and Nathaniel had not looked away. Martha poured the coffee, and went back to the kitchen and let them have the room. They sat with their coffee in the evening quiet, and after a while, Nathaniel reached across the table and set his hand over hers, not gripping, just covering the same gesture he had made in the ballroom when she was shaking and Crow was 30 seconds away. Warm, steady. She turned her hand over and held his. Outside, Virginia settled into its summer evening, the fields going gold in the last of the light. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary night moving through an ordinary house, except that nothing about it was ordinary. And both of them knew it, and neither of them needed to say so. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, in the same small courthouse where Aldrich had voided Crow's claim with Whitfield and Martha, and a small gathering of people who had watched this story unfold and wanted to see where it landed. Eleanor Whitmore and Nathaniel Blackwood stood before Judge Aldrich a second time. No private agreement, no annulment clauses, no carefully worded escape routes. Just two people who had chosen each other in the clear light of everything they now knew about who the other person was. Aldrich looked at them both over his glasses. "Ready," he said. Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. He was already looking at her. "Yes," she said. And this time she meant it in every direction there was, and that was not the ending of anything, but the absolute and irreversible beginning of everything that mattered.